Hello, everybody. My name is Megan Hamilton, and I'm so happy to be here today. I'd like to thank Amy and Nancy Harrington for inviting me to do this workshop on public speaking in what is a time when I think most of us should be using our voices as much as possible. So like I said, I'm thrilled to be here. I am a speaking, confidence, and visibility coach. I work with women to help them learn how to speak up and be confident and be more visible in their general lives. So this workshop is going to help you learn how to carry your body in space using the Alexander technique. We are also going to focus on controlled breathing as well as deep breathing to support your voice. We are going to learn how to speak using your optimum pitch. And then I'm going to teach you this great technique called text mapping, which can show you how to read speeches effectively. And another little small piece of housekeeping, if you could stay on mute until the end when we'll have Q&A, that would be amazing as well. So this work, as I said, is going to be useful in so many ways, not just to give a speech, but also how to have a difficult conversation. This keeps coming up as we're in a strange time in history right now. You're going to learn how to keep yourself calm and know how to physically carry yourself with lots of power, so you can have political conversations, you can have difficult conversations at work, you can learn how to call out somebody whose behavior is unacceptable, and you're going to learn how to actively create boundaries for yourself using the techniques that we're talking about today. This is really important for all women around the world, and especially important at this particular moment in history, as I think we all owe it to ourselves to really speak up in times when the speaking up needs to be done. So with that in mind, I'm going to teach you how to stand using Alexander technique. So Alexander technique is an old system. It was developed in the late 1800s by an actor who was realizing that he was losing his voice. He wanted to figure out what was going on, and so he decided to start tracking himself using a mirror. And he noticed that for times when he had sort of more physical characteristics, he was really losing his voice. And he realized that there's a connection between a looseness in your body and free-flowing energy and causing a lot of tension in your throat and your shoulders, creating sort of hoarseness or losing your voice, essentially. So what we now know as the Alexander technique started from there, like I said, in the late 1800s and has evolved. There's been tons of studies on it, tons of research. A lot of people claim it does a lot of different things. All I know is it is the best way to carry your body in space. It's the least damaging. And over time, using the Alexander technique can actually help deal with some muscular difficulties that you might have inherited over the years. So I'm not an Alexander coach. That is extensive training over many years and lots of clients and lots of hours. However, I have been given permission to teach you all how to stand using the Alexander technique. And I'm also going to teach you how to sit using the Alexander technique. Just going to make sure I'm not missing any important questions. Okay, so I'm going to invite you all to stand at this point, and I'm going to talk you through it. So in your standing position, take a nice deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And take your feet and put them either in hip or shoulder width apart, whichever is most comfortable for you and helps you feel nice and solid connecting with the ground. If standing is not available to you, then just do what you can in a sitting position. So begin by feeling as though your feet are melting into the ground. And what I mean by that is that as much surface area of the bottom of your feet as possible is connecting with the ground. Just feel that connection as we move our focus up to our knees. I'm going to give them a little shake and make sure they're unlocked. And as we're going through this series, every time we try something new, go back to your knees and just make sure they're still unlocked, because often what will happen is we'll go back into a sort of a locked position as we're trying to support a new section of our body. But what we're actually trying to do is from the feet all the way up to our head, open up and learn a new way of carrying yourself. So your knees, you give them a shake, they're unlocked. From there, you want to come on up to your hips and you want to have a slight pelvic tilt forward and come up and out of your hip sockets and mildly engage your abdominal muscles. So you're creating an openness in your hips. You're going to have to use some of your abdominal muscles in order to stand up straight, but you still want to keep them as loose as possible to support nice, deep breaths. And from there, just check on your knees. We're going up to your chest. And you want to raise your chest and have it as much as possible going towards the ceiling. And I don't mean that you're going to be arching your back, but with a straight back, think about bringing your chest up towards the ceiling. And at this point, you're creating sort of an openness in your upper torso. Sometimes this can feel vulnerable to people, especially if you have been carrying yourself sort of hunched over, if you are trying to take up as little space as possible. Just be aware that if you suddenly feel this sense of vulnerability or uneasiness, just try to breathe through it and know that over time, this will become more comfortable for you. So with your chest towards the ceiling and in this open position, I'd like you to focus on your shoulder blades and feel as though they are moving apart from each other, just slightly. And in this position, with a deep breath in through your nose, you're going to release your shoulders. So often when we talk about good posture, we talk about thrusting our shoulders back, and that shows strength. What actually happens over time is if you are changing your musculature so drastically, everything else in your body is affected, because once you change one thing, everything else is affected. So this actually allows your shoulders to release and relax in a more appropriate and supportive way, and will allow you to take deep breaths that we'll use later for controlled breathing and to support a really strong voice. So from here, we're going to move on up to your neck. Just have it go from side to side, and notice if you feel any crunching. Most of us will, especially because we're in month 5, almost 6 maybe now. At this point, we've been sitting at our computers a lot. And so being aware of your neck, the prompt is to have it be free and easy. And sometimes the next step actually can help with your neck, which is to focus on the top of your head and feel as though it's moving towards the ceiling. And again, this is a very slight adjustment. But in this position, with your feet melting into the floor, your knees unlocked, your hips up and out of their sockets with a slight pelvic tilt forward and your abdominal muscles mildly engaged, your chest towards the ceiling, your shoulder blades move slightly away from each other and released in that position. Your neck is free and easy, and your head is moving towards the ceiling. This is basic Alexander. And this is the least harmful way for you to stand. Now, a quick note about this, it may not feel comfortable, and it likely won't, because your body has clocked however you've been standing as the way to stand. And so often Alexander can feel strange at first because you are readjusting what normal is in your mind. And so just keep that in mind. But in this open position, you're actually taking up a lot of power. You're allowing energy to move freely through your body. You are engaged. It's an active stance, and it's stretching your body slightly as you're going through each of the steps of Alexander. So it's keeping you really engaged. So I'm going to invite you to sit back down, unless you're at a standing desk. And I'm going to quickly go through Alexander for sitting, because this is incredibly important for right now. as you're adjusting into your chair, I want you to move forward so that your sitting bones are right on the edge of your chair. With your feet in front of you at shoulder or hip width apart, whichever is most comfortable. I want you to find a point of balance between your feet and your sitting bones. And so you'll probably be giving more weight on your feet than you normally would if you were sitting in a chair. But as my old teacher used to say, this allows you to get up and go if you really need to get up and go quickly. And so with your balance between your feet and your sitting bones, the rest of Alexander for sitting is pretty much the same. Hips up and out of their sockets, slight pelvic tilt forward, abdominal muscles mildly engaged, chest towards the ceiling, shoulder blades slightly separated, shoulders released in that position, neck free and easy, and head towards the ceiling. From here, sometimes we have to figure out what to do with our hands. So you want to keep your shoulders released in that position and try to keep your elbows as close to your body as possible. And from there, you just sort of want to navigate your hands over the keyboard. And this can sometimes, sorry about that, I don't know what happened. This can sometimes take a little bit of getting used to, but this is Alexander for sitting. And you can imagine that if you're in a Zoom meeting, so often what will happen is we sit back into our chairs and we sort of sink into a comfy position. But what happens in this position as well is your energy starts to dissipate. You might get a little bit sleepy. You might lose your ability to focus, so you might lose something. When you're sitting up in Alexander, you're staying actively engaged and you are allowing energy to flow through your body. And this is really helpful if you're going to be presenting. So a lot of times at work these days, we are presenting via Zoom, or we have to sit through sort of longer meetings, which could be difficult. If you try to sit in Alexander, that can help keep you energized and engaged. And standing and sitting in Alexander also helps support nice deep breathing, which is what we're moving on to next. So again, the 4 basic principles of great public speaking are standing, breathing, speaking, and reading. And we've just finished standing. One thing I want to say, if you're ever in a situation where the power dynamic is off and somebody is putting a lot of stuff on you, they might have a lot of anger or a lot of sort of big energy, whether it's positive or negative. Sometimes that can be a lot to take in. I've been in situations before where someone comes at me with like a whole lot of energy. It's frenetic, it's chaotic. And as a sensitive person, you know, I sometimes will take that on. And if what I've noticed is if I stand and I roll myself up into Alexander, that will often quickly change the dynamic, make it more equal. And the other person's like, whoa, what's happening right now? They don't realize they've just sort of watched you shift your energy into a more calm and powerful position, but they will feel it and they will act accordingly. And I've seen it happen several times. So try that out next time you are in a situation where you feel like you want to be more powerful. See if you can roll up into Alexander and see what happens for you. So at this point, we're going to move on to breathing. The first thing we're going to focus on is controlled breathing. And this is one of my favorite tools to talk about. So I'm going to invite you to pick up your pen or open up your Word document because we're going to talk about stress responses right now. One of the biggest hurdles to speaking up, public speaking, having a difficult conversation, calling somebody out at work is your nerves. So we get stressed out about it. You know, I've had people come to me for speaking help, people who've had to take beta blockers when they have to give a work presentation, people who blush and cannot get past that and are so afraid of blushing that they will ditch whatever they have to do. So controlling these nervous responses, controlling these stress responses will give you a much more solid base from which to start. So stress responses are what we commonly call fight or flight or freeze. Fight, flight, and freeze are sort of the new the new way of talking about that. And essentially what's happening is you are feeling stressed. It sort of ignites an old lower brain response, which is that you are in danger. And so your brain will start pushing stress hormones to your bloodstream, cortisol and adrenaline. And you can feel that sort of rush of adrenaline, but not necessarily in a good way. And so a lot of things can start happening to you physically when you have this excess of adrenaline and cortisol in your bloodstream. So I'm actually going to read out all of the ones that are listed in this. This is from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it is all about stress response. If you're interested in this document, it's actually quite fabulous. My email address is right there by my name. It's megan@ubuskills.com, and please write to me and ask me for the stress response document. I'm happy to send it to you. So what I'm going to do is read out all of the physical stress responses, and I want you to write a check mark for every time you felt something like this when you have to do something difficult, whether it's a job interview, whether it's a speech, whether it's a difficult conversation, you know the drill. So, and there's a lot of them. Okay, I'm going to start now. So start ticking those boxes. Muscle aches, elevated heart rate, weight gain, constipation, muscle twitching, low energy, tight chest, dizziness, stomach cramps, insomnia, headache, nausea, dry mouth, weight loss, weakness, diarrhea, trembling, chills, sweating, choking feeling, leg cramps, hot flashes, pounding heart, chest pain, numb or tingling hands and feet, elevated blood pressure, dry throat, face flushing, which is also what we call blushing, feeling faint, neck pain, increased urination, and lightheadedness. So that's a pretty comprehensive list of physical stress responses. And then there's emotional and thought responses, behavioral responses, how it affects you, et cetera, et cetera. So go ahead right now and count up how many check marks you added right there. I had a client a couple of days ago and she counted more than 20. And she gets really stressed before she has to get up and do something difficult. So controlled breathing is one of the quickest and easiest ways to almost immediately stop the excess of cortisol and adrenaline that are being pumped into your bloodstream. When you use your rational functioning to decide that when you're going to breathe, so you're controlling your breathing as opposed to letting your lower brain sort of do it automatically, your brain realizes that you're not in danger and it stops pumping those stress hormones into your bloodstream. So you are able to calm down. Some of the physical responses begin to dissipate. Some of them take longer than others. You know, if you have trembling hands, they might release a little bit. But the biggest thing for me, and this is for, stress responses are different for everybody, is I am able to think more clearly, because what happens for me when I get overly stressed is that I feel very cloudy. I find it difficult to concentrate. And so practicing controlled breathing allows me to get to a more place of stasis or calm, and so that I can really get into what I'm going to be doing and do a good job. So I'm going to practice controlled breathing with you right now. We're going to do an exercise, and afterwards I'm going to have you write down a couple of things. So make sure you've got that stuff ready. If you are somebody who suffers from panic attacks or extreme anxiety, I want you to just be really careful as we're going through this and notice if anything is coming up for you. If you start to feel particularly anxious, then just maybe take a step back and get back to your own rhythm. Every once in a while, practicing controlled breathing can stimulate hyperventilation. So hyperventilation is when you have excess of oxygen in your bloodstream. And you will notice that by having tingling fingertips or toes. What you want to do if that's happening to you, and just so we're clear, it's not, but I'd like to make sure that everybody knows this ahead of time. If you start to feel that tingling sensation in your fingertips and your toes, then what you want to do is breathe out all of your breath until you can't breathe out anymore. Take a beat and then breathe out a little bit more, and then slowly breathe in again through your nose. And that will help re-regulate your blood oxygen levels so you don't have the excess of oxygen in your bloodstream. All of these tricks pardon me, to manipulate your brain function are pretty cool. So I'm going to lead you through a controlled breathing exercise. We're going to do it for about 2 minutes. I'm going to have you breathe in for 3, hold for 3, and then breathe out for 6. So make sure when you're breathing out that you are almost imagine as though you've got a straw in your mouth, as though you're breathing out through a straw, to make sure that you're getting out, that you can still breathe out until the end of the counting. And then we're going to move up to 4, 4, and 8. And as you're breathing in, I want you to imagine that your lungs are 6 sides. So I want you to think about right and left, front and back, top and bottom, and try to take a deeper breath in each time you breathe in. And as we're doing this, we're expanding our deep breathing, which will support our voice, which is what we're getting to next. So I'm going to invite you to sit in Alexander. So feet flat on the ground, find your balance, hips up and out of their sockets, and moving towards the ceiling. You can either keep your hands flat on your thighs or rest them somewhere comfortable, but make sure that wherever you put them, that they're not carrying any of the weight. All of the balance should be between your feet and your sitting bones. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And in your own time, take 2 deep breaths. Just really notice where you're at today. Take stock of your body. No judgment, but just happen to notice if a shoulder is feeling a little bit tight or if something's feeling a little bit off. And just be aware of that without trying to fix it. So 1 more deep breath in through your nose, and then I'm going to count for you when we're done. So you're going to breathe in, 2, 3, and hold, 2, 3, out for 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out for 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out for 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out for 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out for 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in for 4, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4, out for 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In for 4, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4, out for 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4, out for 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Last time. In, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out for 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then in your own time, come back to your own breathing rhythms. And I'm going to invite you now to go to your pen and paper and write down how you were feeling before the breathing exercise, what you noticed during the breathing exercise, and how you're feeling now. Just take a minute to do that. I'm also going to pop into the chat. I made an animated GIF with this breathing exercise. And it's right there. It's ubuskills.com/tools. And it's my unicorn logo, and it's a 5, 5, and 10. So it has you breathing in for 5, holding 5, and out for 10, and it's on a loop. And so I keep that on my phone, actually. Just realized my daughter has my phone. I was going to show you. But when you're about to do something that is maybe going to be a bit difficult for you, then find a bathroom somewhere for 2 minutes, open up this tool, and just practice your controlled breathing. It helps you get to a place of being calm and focused and ready to go. So for example, last year I had an interview at a college to teach a course. And I already knew that I was in pretty good shape because they had invited me to come and interview. But I still felt nervous because I actually really wanted to do this job. And I was sitting in the waiting room and I could feel myself starting to get those nervous feelings. And so I just pulled up my GIF and I was just practicing controlled breathing, just sitting there looking at my phone. Anyone else in the waiting room with me just thought I was browsing around. And what I was actually doing was getting myself into a calm place. So I really encourage you to, make a bookmark of that GIF and bust it out anytime you need to. The other thing about controlled breathing is the more you practice it, the more your body realizes what's happening a little bit quicker and can actually recognize that you're not in fight, flight, or freeze mode more quickly. So, I suggest to people to practice it for 2 minutes a day. Usually before bed is a great time to do it, but it's also good to do it in the morning because it helps you get to a nice place to start. And I think we can all commit to 2 minutes a day and just see how over time, when you really need to use it, if it's not happening a bit quicker for you because your body recognizes what happened. Your body goes, oh, I know. Okay, we're good. I don't need to keep producing this adrenaline and cortisol. So that's controlled breathing. And now we're going to move on to deep breathing to support a strong voice, which is part 3, which is using your optimum pitch. So as we were doing this breathing exercise, I was asking you to imagine the 6 sides of your lungs. And sometimes another example of thinking about it is as though you're inflating a beach ball. And the reason we suggest the 6 sides is because often we forget about breathing into the top part of our lungs and the bottom part of our lungs. So most of us have heard about your diaphragm, which is this very thin muscular band that connects all of the bottom of your rib cage. And if you think about it like a trampoline, as you're breathing deeply, think about your diaphragm as the starting point for sound. So most of us think about the starting point for sound in our throats. And actually speaking from your throat is a quick way to get volume, a quick way to be sharp, but it can also cause a lot of vocal stress. It can create more tension in your vocal cords than what is needed to actually create good sound. So not unlike the Alexander technique, speaking in what we call the optimum pitch is the least harmful way to speak. And so when I was doing theater training, which is where a lot of this work comes from. So I'm a classically trained actor from 27 years ago now. I used a lot of my training in the public speaking workshop. Using your optimum pitch means that most of the work is being done in the midsection of your torso instead of up here. And so a great way to find your optimum pitch, and because all of you are on mute right now, I'm gonna take a hit and be the weird one and show you how it's done. I'm gonna move my microphone a little bit so it's not super loud, but essentially how you find your optimum pitch, and your optimum pitch is exactly what it sounds like. The most optimal way for you to create sound in your body is you take a nice deep breath in, fill up your lungs as much as possible, and let the momentum of your open rib cage begin to decrease, and just allow sound to come up and out of your body, originating again from your diaphragm. So if you don't know, your diaphragm is sort of below your solar plexus, just above your belly button. That's where you want to imagine that the sound is coming from. I'm going to do it first, and then I'm going to invite all of you to do it. As you're doing it, I want you to keep your right and your left hand on the top of your rib cage, and I want you to notice if you feel any vibrations. Okay, so this is how we should do it. One other small thing to think about is don't second guess yourself. Try not to use your brain for this. Allow whatever's happening to happen. And so as we go from the transition from breathing in to breathing out, often we can stop and think, am I doing this right? And then that actually stops the natural flow of sound that you're trying to create. So notice if you do that as well. It can also be helpful to originate the sound in a ha sound. And again, imagine that that is coming up from your diaphragm. And so this is what it's going to sound like. And again, it's weird. So warning in advance. So you're going to breathe in and go like this. And so on and so forth until you lose all of your breath. So I'm going to invite you all to do this on your own. Take a deep breath in. And in your own time, we'll let it out. Remember to keep your hands on your chest and notice the vibrations. In theater school, we once had one class that was an hour and a half, and that's all we did. We sat in our chair, we took our deep breaths in, we let it all out in a ha for an hour and a half. And yeah, that felt good. That released a lot of tension and got our voices sort of deeper and deeper. And it was an exercise in focus and all kinds of things like that. But yeah, so you can imagine that as you practice that on your own and you start to feel vibrations moving through your body, you'll start to notice that sound is reverberating in all kinds of places. And this is creating resonance for you. And so it'll reverberate on your cheekbones, the back of your skull, the top of your head. You can even go all the way lower on your rib cage into your back. And that's when you really know that you're using your optimum pitch, is when you've got that resonance throughout your body. So often men naturally have that resonance and women don't. We have sometimes been socialized to speak more softly, more quietly, or with a higher pitch. Sort of how we naturally speak to babies is using a higher pitch because it's a bit more pleasing. And so I invite you to find that sound within yourself that may not have ever seen the light. Sometimes it can be very powerful. And I've also had people have emotional response to the sound that they're creating because it's something very foreign to them. So just keep that in mind for yourself as well as we're going through this work. So we've learned how to stand and sit. We've learned how to control our breathing so that we can stay calm and focused and stop some of those stress responses that we talked about with all the check marks that we did. We've learned how to take deep breaths, thinking about the 6 sides and using that breath to support our voice. You've learned how to find your optimum pitch. And so now we're going to put it all together with text mapping. So text mapping is the 4th piece. It's reading in terms of the 4 elements of public speaking that we're talking about today. Text mapping is sort of what it sounds like. It's when you've written out your presentation or your speech or your job interview questions ahead of time, word for word, exactly how you want to say them and organized in a way that makes a lot of sense. And then you're going to start marking it up and mapping. The first thing you want to do is put in breath bars. And breath bars are basically like your backslash on your computer. Those go in all of your punctuation points. So your periods, your question marks, your commas, your semicolons, any particular point that is dividing up a thought into a sort of a succinct chunk is where you're going to take a breath. Now there's two types of breaths. There is your full breath, which happens at the ends of sentences, very occasionally at a semicolon if you're in a particularly long sentence and you need to take a full breath. But generally the rule is a full breath at the end of your sentence and top up breaths throughout at punctuation points. So this works for a variety of reasons. First of all, if you're taking a top up breath, what you're doing is keeping your lungs inflated. When you are taking a top up breath, great. You are keeping your lungs inflated so that you've got enough breath to get you to the end of your sentence, because the last bit of your sentence is often the most important part. It summarizes everything that's come before. And how many times have we heard a presentation or a speech where the person is running out of breath and is getting a little bit stressed about that, and so they keep talking and they don't want to take a breath, and so they'll get to the end of their sentence and you've lost what they've just said. So you've lost the summary of the sentence because they've run out of volume or their voice gets a little bit like this, and you can't actually hear what they've just said. So keeping the top up breaths to make sure that you've got enough breath to really pow at the end of your sentence is super important. The other reason why having the breath bars is really important is because when we decide ahead of time, this is my favorite thing, which you can probably tell, when we decide ahead of time where we're going to breathe, we are practicing controlled breathing. And what we've already learned from part 2 is that when you practice controlled breathing, you are keeping your stress hormones down, you are stopping yourself from going into fight, flight, and freeze mode, and you are keeping yourself calm and reducing the amount of physical reactions we have to stress. So controlled breathing is not just, 3-3-6 or anything like that. It is practicing any kind of breathing where you are outside of your regular body creation of breath. And so your lower brain at the back of your head controls your breathing function. And when your upper brain or your frontal cortex decides when you're going to be breathing, you are getting yourself out of your stress response. So putting your breath bars in your speech means that you're controlling your breathing, which means that you're putting right into your presentation a way for you to stay calm and controlled. It's also keeping you nicely paced, and it also means that you're taking slight pauses between clauses or different chunks of thoughts, and that means that the person who's listening to you is able to absorb that little chunk and move on with you as you go through. If you are doing a really long sentence with no breaks, your audience is not going to be able to retain all of that. We actually need little breaks as well to be able to digest what you've just said. So there's so many reasons why putting in those breath bars is really important. And then from there, you can actually do a few other things. As women, we will often practice something called up-talking, which is that when I'm speaking to you, I end all of my sentences with an upward inflection. So to an audience member, that actually sounds as though you're asking a question or asking for validation or asking for permission to be there. So right away, it takes away your sense of power and the fact that you have every right to be there. As an audience member, that's what our ears hear, and that's how we start to view you. So if you are a person who uses up-talking, then you're going to want to put a downward inflection at the end of all of your sentences. That is going to remind you to end strongly. and not as though you're asking a question. So if you are asking a question, it's absolutely fine to use an upward inflecting arrow, or if you're doing a list, because that can help people, because our ears automatically understand that there's more coming when there's an upward inflection, if that makes sense. So the list would go something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. And you know then that the fourth is the last item in that list, and we're moving on from there. That's another trick to help you keep your audience on the go. There's so many different ways that vocally you can help your audience be able to retain what you're saying a little bit better, because that's generally, you know, the goal of what we're doing is you want your audience to leave with as much of what you said as possible. So we're eliminating as many barriers to communication as we can. So you've got your speech, you know how to stand, you know how to breathe, you know how to speak. You've got everything ready, you've mapped it out. And now we're going to do something called think, breathe, speak. And this is when you read between 3 to 7 words ahead of what you're speaking. And actually, when you get really good at this, you can do more than 3 to 7 words. So what's happening is you are actually reading, sort of storing that information in your brain before you speak it. So it's sort of like this ongoing loop of getting information in there and speaking it a little bit later. And so it's sort of like, you know, when you're watching Netflix or something and the computer or your TV starts doing that little circle arrow, or that circle, to show you that it's buffering. So you're sort of creating buffering in your head. And what this allows you to do is be able to make eye contact with people. So you are creating a bank of 3 to 7 words, and you can look up from your page and speak directly to people. On Zoom, this is really effective if you want to use the camera, but in real life, it allows you to make individual connections with people in the audience. And that is really powerful for both the audience and yourself. We like to have a little bit of a connection with the person who's speaking. And as the person who's speaking, it actually becomes a lot more meaningful to us if we can make active communication with the audience as well. Even if they're not speaking back to us, there's a bit of an exchange with the eye contact, and it feels good for everybody. So one of the ways that you can use this to your advantage in a Zoom call is, I like to put, if I've got everything mapped out ahead of time, if I'm delivering a speech, I'll have it sort of behind the camera on the wall behind me, and then I'll be reading from it, and then I'll be able to direct some of it to the camera, and then I go right back to my spot on the page, read a little bit more, and then come right back to the camera. And, you know, in this age of Zoom, and we don't know how long we're going to be using this as frequently as we are, it's really effective to speak to the camera as much as you can. And imagine that on the other side of that camera are the several people who are tuning in to what you're saying. It helps us remember that we're human beings talking to human beings in a bit of a strange way, but still keeping that connective tissue together. So I see there's a couple of questions here, so I'm just going to make sure I get to them. I imagine the controlled breathing would be helpful before sleep. Is this accurate? Absolutely. And that's why I would recommend doing it at nighttime before you go to sleep. So if it's on your phone, and if you are a person who keeps your phone by your bed, which I'm guilty of, but some people say that you're not supposed to do that. You can pull up that GIF that I told you about, which you can find on my website in the tools section, and just practice that for 2 minutes, and it gets you into a nice and relaxed state. Any tips for what to do if you completely lose your train of thought in the middle of a presentation? How do you get back on track? That is a great question. And that is exactly why I teach this system of standing, breathing, speaking, and reading. You go right back to square one. You've lost yourself. You're feeling a little bit panicked. What do we do? Okay, go back to square one. Get yourself into Alexander. Take a deep breath. Make sure that you're using your powerful voice and find your spot in your speech again. When we make mistakes, the best way to handle that is to acknowledge that you've made a mistake. So whether you've lost your spot or whether you've said a word wrong or you've given the wrong stat, anything could happen. The best thing that you can do is acknowledge that you've made the mistake, because as an audience member, we have sensed that something has happened. We don't necessarily know what that is. We don't know that you've made a mistake in speaking. We don't know that you've lost your spot. We don't know what's going on, but we can sense that something's happened. And as soon as we sense that, we start to feel a little bit worried about you. And you don't want your audience to worry about you, because then they're going to spend the rest of the time wondering if you're okay, essentially. It's sort of like if you've ever seen a play where there's a fight scene and you're not entirely sure if it was well choreographed and that maybe somebody got hurt in the middle of that fight scene. You sort of spend your time and then you are away from what you've been witnessing. You're sort of outside of the magic of the play and wondering, is the person okay? So acknowledge that you've made the mistake and avoid using using I'm sorry. And especially as women, man, we really would like people to know when we've made a mistake, and we can get really upset and flustered about it. But all you need to do is acknowledge that you've made a mistake. Use a phrase that suits your personality, but is not I'm sorry. And that could be something like excuse me, or pardon me, or that's not the right stat. Let me find the right stat for you. Something really simple. Keep it calm, keep it light, and then move on. Because if you can keep it calm and keep it light, you are actually reacting to yourself as well, if that makes sense. So if you start to speak and you get flustered, you can hear that within yourself, and you start to sort of feed on that as well. If you are staying calm and using your strong voice, you recognize that you're in control. It's almost like seeing yourself outside of yourself, but it really works. And then you can move on from there. So again, if you've made a mistake, if you've totally lost your train of thought, if you've gone away from what you were supposed to be saying, just acknowledge that, go back to Alexander, go back to step one, move through the series and the sequence and get yourself back on track. It's okay if you take a couple of seconds to regain your composure, to take a deep breath, all of those things, because that is so much better than getting totally railroaded and off track. And the last 20 minutes of your presentation are full of nervousness and speeding up and just wanting to get out of there. It is so much better to take a beat, find yourself again, and get back on track. Is it okay to refer to notes when speaking? Yes, absolutely. So like I said, I strongly advise you to write out your entire speech from front to back. Write it out using the exact words that you want to say, so you're not sort of mentally fishing around for words in the moment. I lose words when I'm nervous, and so I can spend a lot of time trying to find a word. If you write it out ahead of time, you're not going to have to do that. And again, that's where the text mapping comes into play, is that you are learning how to speak effectively and not robotically. When you're connected to what you're saying, you actually have a musicality to your voice that people recognize. So if you're just simply reading from a text and you sound sort of robotic, or you're not essentially emotionally connected to what you're saying, we're also not going to be connected to what you're saying. We're going to notice that you are speaking robotically. We inherently realize that that means you're not connected to what you're saying. However, if you're starting from your optimum pitch and using that sort of powerful sound and connecting to what you're reading as you're doing the think, breathe, and speak, so you're taking in words before you're delivering them, you are adding a musicality naturally that we respond to, and it'll stop you from sounding robotic or sounding as though, essentially sounding monotone or boring. How do you feel about memorizing your script? I feel that that's great. I feel that if you have the capacity to do so, if you have the time and you've written things out ahead of time, memorizing your script is ultimately the most incredible way to be able to deliver what you're trying to say. So, and actually using the breath bars that we talked about ahead of time can really help you get to the point where you're easily memorizing as well, because you are creating the little chunks that you're memorizing. And sometimes you can see that depending on how you learn, because everybody has different learning methods. You can sometimes see those different breath bars and the different sentences between the breath bars, and that can help you retain the information, sort of like how you're helping the other person retain the information. And another trick about memorizing, so a long time ago, I guess we've moved into question and answer. I didn't actively announce that, but I saw that there was questions, so that's where we're at, question and answer. A long time ago, I was doing a Shakespeare play, and my character had a list. And so it was this long soliloquy, and there was all of these. I was trying to decide if I was going to stay with this lover or not. And so there was this huge list of basically the pros and the cons. And I was going through the list, and you're not supposed to do this when you're an actor, but my mind happened to wander, and I thought, I don't remember what comes at the end of this list. I can't remember what I'm supposed to say. And so I started to panic a little bit. Now, I had done this play at this point probably about 25 times. So I knew I was going to be safe in sort of going through the motion, but my brain was thinking about what was going to come next. And I was trying to remember, I couldn't remember. And then I got to the end of the list, and my mouth went to say the first part of the next sentence that my brain had forgotten. So the muscle memory took over, and I went to say the first word, and then I was fine. It just sort of allowed it to happen. And so memorizing ahead of time, as many times as you can say this speech or presentation or whatever it happens to be, you can develop muscle memory, and that helps you memorize it even better. So hopefully that's a helpful little tip there. How do I translate the confidence I have doing a Zoom or Facebook Live into presenting in front of a larger in-person audience? That's a great question. And ultimately, the only difference is the energy that you feel from the people when you see them in person versus sort of this, so right now I'm delivering, I'm not even sure how many people are tuned in right now, but there's several logos in front of me. I'm not actually seeing anybody's face. And sometimes that can be tricky because we're used to seeing people's faces. We're used to having sort of a communication exchange. And that is what happens when you're live. And so the difference between delivering via your computer and delivering live is just actual energy that you're getting from people. And you're getting lots of different hits from people. How they're sitting gives you information, whether they make eye contact with you or look away gives you information, whether they're looking at their phones instead of looking at you gives you information. All of these things are just more things to focus on. And so that's why having this system can be really effective for the nervousness you get when you're speaking to a larger group of people, because you know exactly what to do. You've prepared. You know what to do if you start to get nervous. You go back to controlled breathing. You've got your script in front of you. You know how to stand, you know how to breathe, and you know how to speak. And you will find that the controlled breathing, and especially building in the breath bars into your speech, means that you are much more calm than you otherwise would be when giving a presentation in front of that many people. If that makes sense. I find that this system allows you to find the confidence because you're not fishing around for how you're doing it. You already know the how. You've been working on that for the last little while. It's the 4 steps that we've just been talking about. I've spent my entire life speaking to live audience and live students. Now I have to talk to a camera lens, and I feel like an idiot and can never seem to get that passion and rapport I have with a live audience. Any tips to overcome this? Yes, this is definitely a difficult piece of Zoom, and it's one that's not going away. So I can tell you that what I do, I actually imagine people on the other side of the camera. And so again, I have a little bit of experience with that because of my theater and film training. When I was, delivering performances on camera before, I would imagine the other person on the other side of the camera, and that really helped. And so what I like to do is imagine all of the people that are on the other side and make sure that I am giving as much of my energy as I can, sort of in this unknown crowd, but knowing that they're there. And effectively, I actually imagine a group of people there. Sometimes I imagine like a hall of people, and sometimes I imagine, like the Zoom squares of the people behind the camera. And that really helps me to connect sort of in a more meaningful way than it might be otherwise if I'm just like, yeah, I'm just here in my office, nobody's here. I make myself remember that there are a lot of people, and that for me, it really helps me stay engaged and remember that it's people that I'm speaking to, not just sort of this box in front of me. I hope that's helpful. Okay, so that is all I have for questions at this point. If there's any more coming, please do pop them in for me. And I want to let you know that I do a weekly newsletter. It comes in your inbox every Tuesday. You can get on it by signing up at www.ubuskills.com. Can you talk just a bit about volume in live audience and now on the camera? That's actually a really good point. So optimum pitch is amazing for having volume. There's hardly a place these days, aside from the stage, where you're going to have to use projected speaking. That's where your optimum pitch comes in really handy, because you can have deep volume that extends to an amphitheater or whatever. Most of us are now going to have microphones available to us. I'm finding, and I've actually been doing some research with my old voice coach, that I am losing my voice while I'm doing all of this Zoom work, because I'm on Zoom quite a bit, whether I'm coaching or giving workshops. And I think it has to do with an awareness of the microphone being right here and not feeling comfortable using your full voice. So you're feeling like you have to sort of change your voice for this Zoom. I also think that, and there's been a lot of research about this, and you can Google it. We're having difficulty in Zoom, and we're becoming quite tired by it because we're not having the exchange that we normally would if we were teaching to a classroom or giving a speech or giving a presentation in the boardroom at the office. And so we are overcompensating for a lot of the exchanges that we would normally have, the sort of eye contact exchanges or energy exchanges or noticing somebody else's body and how they react to what you've just said. We're having to compensate for all of that in our brain. And I happen to think that is affecting me vocally. So there's two ways to go about that. What I'm trying to do is use my full voice. And so I do a sound check ahead of time, and I sort of correct my volume levels on Zoom. And that's a little bit more technical than most people are used to. But certainly you can Google that. The other thing is to use a really sensitive microphone like this one that I have. And this is by Blue. It's called the Yeti. It's a condenser microphone. And again, you're going to want to get comfortable with the settings on that, because there's 4 different microphone settings. But that will allow you to find what your full voice sounds like and make sure you get the settings right so that you're speaking properly instead of doing this sort of strange whisper talking that we're doing on Zoom right now, because we're still trying to figure out how to be on Zoom. I hope that's helpful. Okay, Carolyn says, what about using your hands and not using your hands? Is that a personal thing, or should we not worry about using our body to express ourselves, sit on our hands kinds of thing? Carolyn, that's a great question. I am a huge believer in being yourself as much as possible when you're delivering information. However, some of our behaviors can be distracting. So my suggestion for people who use their hands to emphasize what they're saying is absolutely use your hands to emphasize important points in your speech or your conversation, but be very particular about when you're going to be using your hands. So go through your speech ahead of time and pick the 5 most important points. Pick the 5 points that if people walk away with nothing else, you want them to at least walk away with those 5 points. And then use your hands when you are making those specific points, because when you change your physicality, people realize, oh, okay, something's changed. I'm going to perk up. I'm going to listen, and they're going to pay more attention. When you are emphasizing certain things, we understand using our ears, using our eyes to watch what you're doing. This is something we need to sort of listen up to. So for the other times when you're not using your hands, practicing Alexander and just letting your hands be at your sides can be very effective as well, sort of having a tall, strong presence. If you're using a podium, which most of us would be, then I suggest resting your hands on the podium. Again, not putting any weight on them, because that takes away from being grounded into the floor, but just allowing them to rest there and busting them out for the key points. Is that helpful? Hopefully that's helpful. Yes, excellent. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we leave? Was this helpful for you? Do you feel like you're walking away with something useful? Great. I think, one of the cool things about this work is that it extends to lots of different areas. And once you start to really think about it, you can think, oh, I can use this for, I don't know, Thanksgiving dinner or somewhere else where I'm going to have a difficult conversation. Like I said, I am very accessible. Please email me at any point if you've got questions or you have something you want to talk about. And thank you so much for having me today. I'm very happy to be here. I always love talking about this stuff, and I hope that you're leaving with a new way of thinking about how you're going to communicate that's going to serve you well. And thank you very much.